No, you guys never seen that?
A French guy who builds chocolate
No,
on
he's like all
YouTube?
over. He's on social media and he does like all like he can.
And we're live.
Oh, there we go.
And we're live. Here we
And
are. Drones
just
After
like
Dark,
that,
take two.
just like that, we're live.
It was just my first, got on my first go.
Now it's gonna
Super
sound.
easy.
Now it's gonna sound rehearsed. Go ahead, Bobby. Do your thing again.
Tell the mom joke. Welcome, welcome to Drones After Dark. We have our special guest, Rahul Sidhu, with us, former CEO of Aerodome and a company in the DFR space that just got acquired by Flock a few months back. Now he leads aviation at Flock Safety and does big, important things. Welcome, welcome.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me. I can't go back and do the jokes that I wasted on the previous cold open because that just doesn't feel authentic. So I'm going to save roasting you over the next 60 minutes. I'm just going to sprinkle it in.
Okay. Yeah, we'll just both roast Lewis.
Me, I'm not the one that's responsible for this.
Uh-huh.
But look, I didn't show this before, but I'm all flocked out today.
Oh, you got a flock shirt on?
Yeah, man.
My man. What does it say
It,
underneath the cameras?
it doesn't say anything. Oh yeah, it does. It says the Dream Team.
Wow.
But this is pre DFR flock. So
Mm.
this might be worth more.
Yeah, vintage flock.
Yeah,
That's
this is
right.
vintage flock. So it's
Yeah.
worth a little bit more than current flock.
Yeah, vintage flock is yeah, it's a hot commodity. I don't have, you know what? The funny thing is I'll go into the office and I'll like go to the flock events and I'll see people that have absolute banger swag, like they're running old school flock stuff and it's like I want it. But I might have to take matters in my own hands and start building my own flock stuff. Just for you, Lewis.
I appreciate it. Do you guys have flock socks?
No, we've avoided the sock game recently. A lot of sock controversy. We're gonna stick to shirts and hats, I think.
Maybe gloves? Gloves, they make those gloves for people that fly drones in cold weather, where your
Ah,
index finger and your thumb. So maybe flock can come out with those gloves.
you know what? You don't need those gloves if you're flying DFR drones from the real-time crime center.
But not
That
everybody flies DFR. And then
that's
they can
true.
say, "Don't flock me," or
Ah, that's
"Don't
pretty good.
don't don't flock with me," or something. I
Don't
don't know.
flock with us. Yeah, yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm gonna pass that up the chain.
Yeah, let me know how that goes.
Yeah, I will.
So, on their first attempt at this, I think Bobby kind of like said that he kind of gave you credit for starting DFR or something like that, and then we were going back and forth, right? And
Nope.
I don't think he gave me
Never
credit because
happened.
that would be a very absurd thing. Fritz Reber invented DFR. Fritz in Chula Vista, good friend of mine, obviously works on our team. That man is the godfather of DFR. Best I can say is number two for me. I was spinning up in Redondo, but none of us would be here talking about any of this stuff if it wasn't for Fritz. So no one has had
true.
an impact on DFR like that man has, and still continues to, even on our team. A lot of the work, we can get to this later, but like the FA opening up waivers and stuff, a lot of it was, Fritz's advocacy along with Charles Werner and a few other folks. But guys like that have been holding the torch for quite some time.
Fritz is a good dude. First time I met him was not a good experience. Not anything with him. It was with the equipment that was there. Um, so I think that's the only like.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. I was like,
so I'm glad that he's where he's at now because his past wasn't nothing that worth us talking about right now. But yeah,
Okay.
I'm glad
sure,
that
Yeah.
I'm glad that he's
So
there now.
so to give
sure.
everyone some context, we have multiple DFR sides in today's conversation. We have our special guest Rahul with Black Aerodome. Uh, he built the system. He is the not the godfather of DFR, just the co-father of DFR. And
The
we
what
have
father?
co-father, like a co-founder.
Co-father. Oh,
Yes.
okay.
And
All
we
right.
have Lewis from Elizabeth PD, who started the first DFR program in the East Coast. And he
Hmm.
is also on the DFR train, however, on the Paladin side of things.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, let's go.
All right,
I
And
let's
Lewis,
jump right on
Lewis,
into it.
I gotta say, Lewis, I think like I actually thought about this on my drive here. I think you personally, as like a one-man machine doing DFR, have more like just probably more DFR hours than anyone I've met. If I had to guess, because you could go to other places and really good programs like in Chula Vista, et cetera, but those manpower hours are like stretched across multiple people over multiple assignments. But you've been doing it like basically mostly by yourself, right? For like 3 or 4 years. Like it's been a while.
So the way I initially took on the challenge, right, of starting DFR was we're and I say this all the time, we're not Southern California, so we don't have Southern California money, right? We have limited budget.
Yeah.
So, we knew that we were going to invest into the tech, but we needed to do it very in an affordable way, right? Meaning we couldn't take cops off the street to fly drones, right? We couldn't pay
Yeah.
a company to come in and fly drones for us. So, and having the ability to do it, and I know we're going to go back and forth over this, but having the ability to do it over LTE, right? And we can be, inside, or we can be inside our command vehicle. We can do it from ground level, right? We don't have to be on top of the rooftop, right? It's northeast, so yeah, we're hot in the summer, we're cold in the winter. Sometimes we have all four seasons in one week, so we don't have the luxury of having 70, an average of 70-degree weather all year round and being able to be outdoors flying the drone.
So,
So
Lewis, can you
very,
talk more about why you chose LTE over radio communications?
I think with us, and it's not a secret. I tell people all the time in the beginning, right? Obviously now there's more players. Everybody sees that, the value in DFR. So in the beginning, it was really just Motorola, right? And that's what everybody on the West Coast was using. They're all using Cape.
Yeah.
So I actually had them come out. We did a few tests in town. We're a city, so we have a lot of tall buildings. We have a lot of interference. So we tested it out. I still have the video saved if people, want to say that I'm, bullshitting, but it's there. I can show it to anybody. We did a few test flights, and even being on a rooftop, with direct line of sight between the control and the drone, the most we were getting out of it was 3/4 of a mile. And I can still remember how we were doing it. We're on a roof of a parking deck that was probably about 10 stories high, and we were aimed towards Staten Island, right? So Staten Island from where we were at was probably, I don't know, a good 2 miles away, and it's Staten Island. Sending the drone straight there, watching the drone the whole time, and it got to like 3/4 of a mile, and all of a sudden, if
Which
everybody,
drone was this, Lewis? Is this the
so
M30?
at the time we were using the M300. So
Okay.
so this was the M300. The M30 wasn't even out yet. So
Yeah.
this was with the M300, and that's what we were getting. So we did tests for 2 days, and it just, I wasn't comfortable, passing that along and having the city, write a check for that solution if we're gonna have issues with it. We
How
weren't
high
gonna
were
be
you
able to.
flying?
We were at 200 feet.
Yeah. Okay.
So
That-
that was my main reason into looking for alternatives, and then it just happened that Palin came along, and they mentioned LTE cellular connection, and I was like, yeah, let's give it a shot. Even in the beginning, it wasn't with any specific DJI product; it was with their own drone, and there was a lot of issues with it, right? A lot of growing pains, and then eventually transitioned into the M30 platform, the M300, now with the M350. So that's the reason for it. I'm not saying that, doing DFR uh, over RF is a bad thing. I'm not saying that. Obviously there's different applications, there's different areas of the country that can benefit from it. But as far as for our needs, it just wasn't going to work.
Yeah, I think it's actually interesting. What you're saying makes sense to me. I mean, it's you guys have certain circumstances that are unique to you, right? I think your grid squares also like you can't fly over 200 feet in some of the areas in your area, and then also you guys were ultimately like I've seen your operation. Like you guys are taking off from ground level and flying, a couple miles out, which is really difficult to do from ground level if that's like where you have a directional omnidirectional antenna. And when you combine those two things, LTE becomes like a really interesting use case. For you, I've always seen LTE as like this is interesting because I've always seen LTE as kind of like a nice redundant thing to have. Lewis, you and I actually, I remember meeting you a little while ago. It was like almost 2 years ago when I sat there and flew with you, and you like talked to me about LTE. And I like got really curious about it, and like I've over the last 2 years on and off plenty of time. Now we have a whole team dedicated to connectivity that's like doing things with cellular and also radio. Like we do it both ways. But I kind of arrived at the conclusion that like when you do have customers who might need it, if you can do radio, radio is generally going to be, if you can, radio is generally going to be a cleaner experience. And this is just my opinion, mainly because for the same reason you have like, radio for patrol radios. Like, we've got dedicated radio bands when we're on patrol cars. Number one, because it's going to be a dedicated experience. Like if you have LTE, for example, I don't know if you have FirstNet, Lewis, or any of those, similar things. If you have a shit hits the fan moment and all of a sudden everyone's trying to call their loved ones, I've got some of these cellular providers that have like the first responder packages. It's not super great when the bandwidth is like supposed to be dedicated and it's not. I don't want to not be able to fly my drone, right? Like if that ends up being the case. Similarly, a lot of these towers, if you want to fly 400 feet, towers aren't designed to like they weren't designed with that in mind. 400
Right.
feet drones flying around.
Down,
Yeah,
not up.
exactly. They're designed to point downward. So, LT might be a really good experience in some places, especially 200 feet, and then some places it won't be. Do you have like dead zones in your area at all with the LT?
Well, that's the we've done so many flights, right? So even last year we ended the year with I think a little bit over 6,500 flights. I think
That's crazy. That's a great
we're
stat.
we're on track, I believe, to be a little bit over 10,000 this year. Completely full
Wow.
time, 7 days a week. So those are the numbers we're hitting. We see DFR as, not as like an aviation unit, right? That's how we treat it, right? There's no
Yeah.
reason why you're not using that resource all the time,
Yeah.
and I get these calls from departments, even with non-DFR related stuff. They're like, oh, we have a drone program, and we bought a drone 2 years ago, and somebody was in charge of it, and then they retired, and now it just sits in a closet. And then you come to find out that it was, somebody else assigned to a specialty unit, right? And it can
Mhm.
be anything, right? That's who had the drone. So even when I give, recommendations to departments, I'm like, when you start a drone program, it should be accessible to everybody in the department, right? And and you should treat DFR the same way, right? It's not like, I know like when it started, the whole phrase is, drone as a first responder gets dispatched to 911 calls, right? I remember hearing that in the beginning. Then I'm like, wait a minute, why is it only, why are we locking ourselves into, it's only going to get response to 911 calls? When you have a radio car floating around the city, right? Are they only responding to 911 calls? No, they're doing proactive stuff, right? They're responding to emergency calls, but at the same time, they're doing proactive work, right? Same thing with an aviation unit, right? If you have an aviation unit, it's flying, right? It doesn't, sometimes they just go up in the air and they just happen to be flying when an emergency comes in. So that's how I see DFR. DFR should be treated, you're spending all that money. It's not a cheap investment, right? It's expensive. Some solutions are more expensive than others. But even if it's a $50,000 solution, still a lot of money for a lot of departments, right? So it should be used all the time. Um, as far as like, I know the whole 200 and the 400-foot thing, I agree with you. Cellular after a certain altitude, the signal's worse, right? And people that know me, like, I get a lot of calls from departments that are looking to start DFR programs, right? And they ask about LTE, right? How, what's the difference? And I don't sugarcoat thing, right? Nobody can ever say I'm a liar and I make stuff up. I don't. I tell them you're always gonna have a better image quality when you're flying, radio, right? Always, right? Because it's a direct connection between the controller and the drone, right? Cellular, it's going from, the module on top of the drone, it's going somewhere else, and then eventually it's coming back, right? So the video is not always going to be as crisp as, radio, but at the same time, even with like dead zones, and you had asked that before. We've done so many flights that our pilots already know. I think we have better info than T-Mobile does as far as coverage, or even FirstNet as coverage in our city, because we know right away when a drone gets sent to a certain location. Our pilots already know where to position the drone, so they know that they're not going to have issues with the feed, right? Not with the connection, but the
Yeah.
feed will, the video quality won't be as great. So yeah, that's always going to be a problem, right? There's going to be areas in the country that don't have any cell signal, right? To me, I think the perfect solution is a DFR solution that has both radio and a cellular connection. To me, I
I
think
agree
that's the
with you.
best.
I agree
I
with you.
think,
Big,
eh,
you get redundancy there.
right, exactly. And if you someday, if you're ever, you're able to fly 5 mile further than 5 miles, right? You have the cellular connection to do it, right? Obviously, at some point, we're going to hope that drones that these platforms are going to have better flight hours, right? Or even if we shift into VTOLs, right, which can fly for 2 hours plus, right? 2 hours plus,
Who's talking about VTOLs, Lewis?
I'm just saying in the future,
This is
right? It
this
could
is
happen.
you're blowing up secrets, dude.
Yeah.
It's drones after dark.
Not real secrets, not
Getting
real
dark.
secrets.
No, listen, there's gonna obviously we have to think ahead, right? There's only so much that you can do with a quadcopter as far as battery, right?
Of course,
Unless some
yeah.
new battery technology comes out, right? So, the max time that we can get is anywhere between 30 to 40 minutes. I think that's probably the best. I don't know what kind of numbers, Skydio or Brink, what they're putting out as far as, their DFR platforms. But as far as anything that's DJI related or even Autel, maybe 30 to 40 minutes depending on
Mhm.
your
Yeah.
conditions.
So Rahul, what's your argument against using LTE or cellular for DFR?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I have an argument against using it. I just think that it's something that's particularly good at solving a unique problem that like some agencies have, like Lewis. And for Lewis, it makes perfect sense. Um, Lewis is also the first ever DFR program, but we have to like give him credit ever like one person program. Before DFR 2.0, with the lack of like, drone pilots on rooftops existed, Lewis was like, fuck it. I've got a van and I'm gonna like use LT and I'm doing all these things. I'm gonna swap my own batteries because I'm gonna land 5 feet away from where I'm flying this drone from. Like he kind of put it together that way. And again, those types of environments make sense. My argument isn't necessarily that that's bad because it makes sense for him. My argument is that you should, as an agency, I think that my opinion is you should try to do radio if you can, because like Lewis said, you're going to have a better video experience. You're going to potentially lower latency, more reliability in that sense. And you're going to be able to fly at 400 feet if you're allowed to per the FAA, which most airspace you're allowed to in the country. So you're going to be able to do those things. And then it's a great redundancy. Either you use LT because you can't do radio, or you use LT and radio in some capacity, with radio being primary. That's my argument. I don't know. I don't know that Lewis. I don't know if you disagree, but that's the way I look at it.
No, listen, I agree with you. I think a lot of times, and there's a lot of misconceptions floating around now because I think one of the big claims against, and we're gonna, I hate being called, that we're very one-sided on this podcast, and I'm not trying to be one-sided. I'm just, stating some facts out there. I know that there's certain DFR platforms out there. I'm not gonna say their name. They have issues flying above 200 feet, right? And they have a very serious connection problems over 200 feet, right? So they have to kind of stick to that.
Come
Um,
on, Lewis, you gotta tell our viewers. They deserve to
Everybody
know.
knows who I'm talking about, dude. They tune in any podcast, they can see who I'm talking about. But so the way I see it is, we fly at 200 because obviously we have to fly at 200. But my thought on the 200 foot, and I know we went back and forth, and I think this is going to turn into a very not an
Productive
angry, not a
argument.
yeah, productive argument, right? I don't want to call it an argument, discussion, productive discussion, because I know we've discussed this, right? Because I know you're big on the 400 foot, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
listen, certain applications, yes, but I think if I'm flying DFR, right? And I know we went back and forth, and you're going to probably throw some numbers at me, and you're going to confuse me with all your technical specs and all that stuff, right? But a
It's
call
called
comes in,
math, Lewis. It's
right? But
physics. What are you talking
all
about?
right, let's just think about a scenario, right? A call comes in, shots fired, right?
Hmm.
Or let's say an LPR hit on a stolen vehicle that my flock
Ooh,
camera picked up,
ooh,
right?
ooh.
Ooh.
Um, so my drone's going to take off, right? And I can get to 200 feet in, let's say, 30 seconds, right?
Hmm.
200 feet, 30 seconds, the drone starts going, right? It's going to
Yep.
get there, right? Now, if I have to go to 400 feet, the drone's going to take double the time. I, I'll let you come back with your rebuttal, right?
Sure, sure,
So it's
sure.
going to take double the time to get up there, right? And if we go quicker, right, to get to 400 feet, that means that the drone's going to have to use more energy, spin a lot quicker to get to 400, right? So it's going to take double the time to get to the altitude to get out to the job, right? So it's going to get out to the job, DFR, right? You want to be on scene, right? Some jobs you go to, there's nothing to it, unfounded, it's going to come back. But some jobs you have to get there, and each second is going to matter how long you can stay on the scene, right?
Hmm.
Now, the drone's going to come back, right? It's going to come back. Obviously, we know that the descending speed is a lot slower, right? So the drone is using a lot more energy to come down. So coming down for 400, and if it's windy conditions, it's going to take a little longer, right? And so now you have to account for all that stuff. 200 feet, it's going to come down quicker, right? So that's my argument with the whole 200 to 400, right? That's my argument between the 2 to 400, right? I want to be on scene quicker. Going to 400 is going to take me double the time to get to the altitude, and then it's also double the time to land. So go ahead. Your turn.
Yeah, look, first of all, you're kind of making it sound like you can either go up or you can go forward. And I think you can do both. At least in our software, you can. So, like we take off. You might like we have agencies will take off 50 feet up and then start ascending and traveling towards the call at the same time. That's Z-axis flight. And so they're not going to cut down their response time with the numbers you were describing by doing that way. And similarly, when they come down to descend, one of my favorite pilots, uh, is he's at Hawthorne PD. His name's Sean Judd. Shout out to you, Judd. I watched that man come down like Top Gun. Like he'll come descend, he'll ascend. I mean, they know exactly how to like be really efficient with their returning to home and coming out. So I don't know that like in my opinion that it has that much of an impact ascending or descending. What I do know is from a physics standpoint, you can see 4 times as much at 400 feet than 200 feet. And in your example of looking for an ALPR car, yeah, you want to get there. You want to get there fast. Like the Fritz's 3 principles of DFR: get there fast, and see shit. If I can't see enough shit, then I kind of feel like, what's the point? If I'm flying and I see 1/4 as much, and I'm looking for a suspect vehicle, I want to maximize my chances of seeing that person. So it's worth it to me to like expend 2% more battery to be at the altitude that I want to be at. So that's a big part of me for 400 feet. The second thing is, and this is also just my experience personally, but I've heard this from other agencies. You probably, you guys are taking off and you're going northbound, eastbound, southbound, westbound, let's say all 4 cardinal directions. It's imagine if this is like how I've seen the communities react to this. Imagine if one day you're a resident and of Elizabeth, New Jersey, let's just say, and all of a sudden an airport gets built right next to your house. And all day you're hearing zero, zero, like constantly all day. And you're like, that is so annoying. And then you find out the airport was built by Elizabeth Police Department. And they're going to be flying, like you said, 7 days a week, flying back and forth, back and forth. If you're flying at 200 feet, there's a physics principle called the inverse square law of acoustics that suggests that at 200 feet, the sound intensity is 4 times as much as it is at 400 feet. So that person's more likely to complain and get tired and start calling city council and saying, this is really frustrating me. At 400 feet, it's really unlikely you're going to hear or see that drone in the first place. And then all of a sudden, that flight path problem with that local Elizabeth PD airport becomes a nothing. And, in my opinion, you gotta limit the amount of times the community is going to say, this isn't worth it. We want to, yeah, we want safety. We want low crime, but this is really frustrating. This loud group of residents that are frustrated that they have a house that is right now next to what they feel like is a drone airport. So that's kind of my point on it.
What are your
So,
thoughts on the acoustic side of things, Lewis? Do you get any complaints on that?
no, we have Newark International Airport in our city, so I think
Nice, nice.
we have bigger issues in an M30 or an M350 flying around, even at 200 feet. And yeah, if it's stationary and it's above you, yeah, I could see you can actually during the day it's hard to even hear it because of all the ambient noise throughout the city. Um, but I don't think for us the 400 foot wouldn't work. And I agree with you. You could see obviously, yeah, the higher up you go, the more you see, right? But you're also relying more on your payload, right? So you have to make sure you have a pretty good payload. And even at 400
Yeah.
feet,
Oh, yeah,
the
that's
higher you
true.
go, the thermal becomes more of an issue, right?
Hmm.
Especially if you're looking for, doing any type of search and rescue. The higher you go, and I'm sure, Kyle's in the comment section. He'll probably agree with me. The higher you go, the less effective that thermal camera becomes, right?
Sure.
So, 400 foot. Listen, obviously, there's going to be pros and cons to both of our, methods of operation between the 2 to 400. We don't have the luxury. We can't ascend and, start flying out at the same time that we're ascending. We have to go to our operating height and then we have to go out because we have tall structures that we need to clear.
Hmm.
And I'm curious to find that. So the pilot that you mentioned, that's all autonomous flight that he's doing that when he's RTH and everything. It's already into the software where it starts descending as it's coming into its home point, or is he taking manual control of the drone?
No, he's a fantastic drone pilot. He takes manual control and he'll bring it to a level and like where he feels like he's really been efficient with his speed to get back, and then he'll hit RTH and let it automatically land on the dock. But he likes to bring it close. He knows his airspace pretty well, and he's doing it all like through regulation and according to agency policy. But he's efficient about it. You actually did bring up one important point, Lewis, which is if you're flying at 400 feet, you need a payload that is capable of supporting 400 feet. And I think that's a limiting factor with some 200-foot operations. If they're using drones, now I'm not saying yours, by the way. I know your drone's capable, but if you're using 200, you're flying 200 feet and you're using a drone that was like built for every other reason to be at 200 feet, and it's not going to be able to read a license plate as easily at 400 feet for like something that's 1,000 feet away, then yeah, you've kind of like you picked a drone that's not going to be good at 400 feet, because the payload's not going to support that mission. If you can't read a plate that far away, then you're kind of limited. Your tech has now limited you to where your useful altitude is.
I can think of two companies that are going to have major issues with that, and that's why they need to operate at 200 feet. But yeah, that is a good point.
So
Obviously,
Lewis,
the payload's going to have a big bearing on on your capabilities at that altitude.
so Lewis, if you didn't have the constraints, if you were in clear airspace, which altitude would you choose to fly at?
I would still choose that 200 foot. Like, if I didn't have those constraints, I would probably be somewhere between 2 to 300. Yeah, maybe slightly under 300.
Why
Um,
not? Why not go all the way to four? I'm curious.
the majority of the calls we're going to, there's really no reason to be discreet about the drone, right? We don't have to worry about noise, right? Our launch locations, we're not launching from, a residential backyard, right? We're in the middle of the city. Even our docking locations are either on the rooftop of schools or firehouses, right? So if you live next to a firehouse, you're used to the fire truck coming out, lights and sirens to every call, right? And like I said, we're Newark International, a third of the airports in our city. So, by the way, which is the most congested airspace in the country. I know that
Mhm.
there's been some places, I think in Texas, that try to take that claim that they had the most congested airspace in the country. No, um, the New Jersey, New York area is the most congested airspace in the country. So there's always planes flying by. There's always noise. So I think I would probably say 250 to 275 would probably be my, and this is, obviously in our space, our airspace to our needs, right? On, all the flights that we've done, I think that would be my ideal operating altitude would be that.
Nice. So we put out a poll. Currently 400 feet is in the lead right now, but
Oh, you put out like a real time poll?
oh yeah, there's
Yeah, dude,
one
you're over.
one vote
Why did
at
it take
200
so
feet.
long to start this podcast if you're advanced enough to be pulling out real time polls, man? This
Oh
Yeah, with
yeah.
guy,
eight votes. Wow.
Uh-huh.
We're doing good. We got a lot of people.
Oh, nine votes. I think I just saw you vote for 200 feet, Lewis.
No, I didn't. I
oh,
should
whoa,
look. You know
oh,
what? Hold on. I'll
whoa,
do it
I
right
demand a
That's
now.
not cool.
recount.
Now,
That's
now
not
that
cool,
you
man.
mentioned it, there you go. 10 votes. It's fair. Listen, 60 to 40. It's fairly close. Um, listen.
It was
Every
like
every
80 to 20.
every department is going to have different needs, right? Just like their DFR program, what type of calls they're going to respond to. It's not every DFR program is the same. That's why I thought it was funny when about a year ago, was it about a year ago that Brink launched their what was it, their DFR playbook or something like that they called it? I think it was
Sure.
about
Oh,
a year
dude.
ago. Yeah,
Sure.
I think
Yeah.
they launched something called their DFR playbook where they're kind of like I don't even know what I think they just got everybody's info from all everybody else doing DFR and they kind of just put it together. So they didn't even have a DFR solution, but they had a DFR playbook. So everybody's gonna have different needs, and I'm sure when you guys onboard departments, everybody asks for something specific. There's not one like cookie cutter DFR program. Everybody's gonna have different equipment requirements, different budgets, different FAA requirements, right? Everybody's different. So that's the beautiful thing about DFR is that we have enough providers in the space right now that
Yeah.
there's something out there that's already for everybody, right? It doesn't mean everybody has to be a flock DFR department or a paladin, right? I know that Axon's pushing hard, right? And I think that's the biggest threat to DFR and even the drone industry in general in the US, right? For public safety. I think it's having, Skydio having Axon's backing, right? So now they have that Axon muscle, right? So a lot of contracts, right? In their Axon contracts, right? Renewals come up. Hey, do you want to? We'll upgrade all your DJI drones, and we'll give you free drones, right? There's no such thing as free. They're gonna hit you on some other line item that you don't see, or down the road you're gonna pay for it. I think that's the biggest threat. So I think having you know Flock, right? Having Motorola still kind of like chugging away, right? And having Paladin, even Drone Sense, right? I think between those four companies, I think there's a solution out there for every type of department.
I think that's right. And I want to be clear. I think that solution exists across the ecosystem. There are things that our competitors do, like that are like again unique things that I think they've like chosen a niche or they're specialized in, and they will be better fit for agencies that require that particular thing. That's a good thing. This is like why competition needs to exist. And like we can sit here, I can tell you that our strategy might be different than some of the competitors you mentioned, whether it comes to product or government regulations or whatever the circumstances are. And that might be true. But the fact that there are so many companies in the space trying to win, like is really good for public safety. Assuming that, doing so doesn't burn the whole thing down, it is
Right.
really good for public safety. So like, including your company, like Lewis, or the one that you're working with, with Divvy at Paladin, like there's unique aspects of everything. And I tell everybody that we personally demo, and I train our guys to do the same thing, is you should make sure the customer looks at everybody. Do a demo. And like I also tell them, like when you do the demo and they say something, ask them to prove it right there. Because I think that's like another thing. You and I as like cops have like, we've dealt with it enough that like we know that you have to ask that question. Oh yeah, that sounds good. Prove it. And then I also ask them like, price it out, and price it out when you're pricing it out, don't like go drone station for drone station because that could be misleading. You have to do what's all the hardware, how much is all the software going to cost me, the hardware, the data, whatever. How much am I have to put like paying like real estate fees, for example, like things people don't think about. How much am I have to pay for services or even personnel costs to maintain a program like this versus a program like that? And you take all those costs and you determine what your coverage area is. Maybe, for you, your coverage area is the whole city of Elizabeth, and you divide that total cost by your coverage area, and that becomes your DFR cost per square mile. And that's like also a way to do a more apples to apples cost comparison because you want to look at every competitor, like every DFR company's unique capabilities and see what fits you best. It might be Flock Aerodome, might be somebody else, and then you want to do an apples to apples cost comparison. And then it also depends on what you want from a DFR standpoint. Every agency I've ever talked to, every single one will say ultimately what we'd love to have is full city coverage 24/7. If
Right.
they had all the money in the world and like they want to work their way towards that. And to start, they might go, now we're going to start, we have X amount of money. This is still a bit of an experiment for us. So we'll start one or two launch locations in a high crime area or in an area that we know will get a lot of community backing. They'll focus it a little bit to start, but ultimately they want to get to that final outcome of like, full city coverage. So, what I tell everybody is, yeah, of course you want to price out what your first year is going to look like, with one or two launch locations that are strategically placed. That's great. But you want to know what your outcome looks like, right? So you also should price out if all of this works out, how much am I going to pay for full city coverage? Because if you find out, oh wait, I'm going to pay 3 times as much and it'll be 3 times as complicated with like this vendor. If my experiment works out, even though like their pilot might be cheaper or whatever, then they might go, oh, that actually doesn't make any sense for me. The end outcome is too expensive for me to even do. So maybe that factors in. And a lot of people when they're spinning up DFR programs, like they're not thinking about this. It's an overwhelming process. You and I have both been through it as like the person at the agency. You're like learning about everything at once, and you're not it's hard to think about these little things, especially when you're dealing with every type of salesperson that's like trying to position a pitch in like a unique and clever way.
No, listen, I agree. It's very complicated, right? And I think the issue that we have is dealing with some of these other companies, right? And their approach into, like, I always tell people, do your due diligence all the time. I don't care if they're calling me to ask me about Paladin, they're calling me to ask me about what are my thoughts on Flock, what are my thoughts on Skydio. I tell them, do your due diligence. I'm like, either go to a department that's already using their solution, right? Or have them send you a demo unit, something like that, right? I tell people all the time because
Mhm.
And not even for like drone related stuff. It's funny because in public safety, a lot of departments they just buy shit blind because,
Mhm.
you know, a friend of mine works for a company and this is what they're selling, or they come in and their salespeople are really good, right? And I tell people all the time, when one of these companies send you somebody, ask them about their background. Or is it a cop selling to a cop, or is it somebody that just graduated college that they hired that's trying to sell to police, right? I tell them all the time, do your due diligence because a lot of times, you know, and you might have seen it. I see it all the time. Even like when my experience on the state and even even on the federal level with these agencies, they buy shit sometimes just to buy. And when I hear,
Sure.
we're buying blah 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 solution because it's the best of the worst. I'm like, so you're buying them and you're justifying their existence because you want a drone program that bad that you're willing to buy the best of the worst. Just by you buying the best of the worst, it's money that now they're shown as revenue. Now they can go in and they can, get more investor money to come in because they're making sales. Like you're hurting the rest of public safety, right? And that's how even on the state level, I tell people all the time when they call me like, "Oh, we're looking to buy this," and I'm like, "Well, what state are you in? Are you obligated? Do you have to buy that?" No, we don't. But we heard that there's going to be a ban. I'm like, well, there's nothing in at least in New Jersey yet, and a lot of other states. So why you're hurting? And I know we discussed this. Like I think educating public safety, I think is the biggest thing right now. And we all think like everybody's on the UAS for public safety. People see our posts on LinkedIn. No, it's not a lot. The majority of public safety is blind to all this. They don't know what's going on, and
Right.
they get conned into all these buying all these solutions. But going back to it, yeah, there's going to be different DFR solutions for everybody. Obviously, some are going to be more expensive than others. Others, they might offer more bells and whistles. The point of the story is do your due diligence. I tell people that all the time. Believe it or not, I've had people that come to me and they see what I'm operating and they still went with Flock,
Mhm.
right? Nothing. I have no animosity against
Goddamn
them, right?
right. Goddamn right, Lewis.
But
Got him.
there's also a lot that come and they see, right? And they see that there's no smoke. And I love, everybody says all the time, dude, your catchphrase is smoke and mirrors, right? And I love saying that because there's no smoke and mirrors. You sat there with me. I didn't hide
Yep.
anything from you. You saw I pressed the button, I sent the drone. I didn't, it performed the way that it performed. You saw it firsthand, right? You can't say, oh my God, Lewis fooled me and he made, he made it look like, it was doing a lot more than it did. No, I don't. And I do that for everybody. I invite everybody to
Well,
come.
you're not a sales guy, Lewis. Like that's the
I'm
point. Like
not.
you're a cop who uses it with a tremendous amount of experience, and like that's going to carry 100 times more weight than anything a salesperson says. So whatever a salesperson says, they're going to go to you and be like, "Hey, man, how's it going? Show it to me." And you're gonna know this person wants to see every single thing. And I know I actually would, I'm gonna give you your flowers here. You're gonna say like, now, like that shit isn't true. Whatever the salesperson told you, that part isn't true. I'm hoping that, turns on soon, but like, it's not true. Maybe it's on the roadmap, but it's not true. Like, I know that that's how you operate too. So like, I think the main thing here is like, go to the agencies and see how they work.
Right.
Like, because it's two things. Number one, you're going to be able to see like what's real, and then the other thing is, and you're going to be here from a user. But the other thing is, you're going to be able to get a sense of how the journey has been with that particular agency and the partner, right? Um, and I actually think you got to go past the company's reference list. So like, if the company says like, yeah, here are 3 customers, like
Yeah, reach out to them.
you reach out to them, sure. But if you know the customers, like the better questions like who do you have in my area? Who's everyone like that's flying in this regard? Like go I know savvy customers will go out and like reach out to people unsuspectingly before the sales rep even has a chance to like let them know that hey, this is gonna happen, someone's gonna reach out to you.
No, I
That's
listen.
really helpful. Yeah.
I
How
I
often do
think
you
that I
provide references?
I mean, when they ask, we provide them. But like when they ask me, I tell them, look, I'll tell you everybody who's flying our system. You can choose the one that's like most convenient for you, and you go take a look. I like to send people to, I mean, like obviously, I like to send people to the programs where I think we have like the most tech deployed. The thing about like Flock Aerodome that I think is really interesting, and one of the reasons that we combine forces on this, and like we're part of Flock Safety now, is that all of it working together is like an order of magnitude more compelling, in my opinion. And if you go to like Dunwoody, Georgia, or Elk Grove, California, like Dunwoody, we just launched. We haven't, you know what? I'll give you guys the early release here. We just launched our Flock 901 in partnership with Prepared, Michael Chime's company. we launched that full DFR integration. So now in the Flock Aerodome software, it's not just CAD calls that get added to the flight maps and augmented reality or the LPR hits. It's the real live 911 calls that come directly into the pilot screen, live transcript translated by language coming directly into the screen, and the location of that iPhone or Android, not like cellular tower pinging, but like the actual location, because Prepared has an agreement with Apple and has the same thing with Android, where you can actually see the location of that 911 caller in real time. And so the transcript's happening in real time. You can see the caller. So now we're jumping that call before you even get dispatched to create like this negative response time. So I like sending people to like you can go to Alhambra, that's flying DFR 2.0. You can go to Dunwoody that's got the Flock 911 integration. I want them to see the magic of if you have a bunch of stuff, here's how it works together. So I like to do that, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to discourage or try to hide anybody because if we're doing our jobs right, everyone should be an advocate.
No,
Well
do
said.
you think at some point that the DFR UI, right? Even and I'm not specifically saying Flock, right? Aerodome. I'm
Sure.
saying, do you think it's ever going to be too cluttered, where it goes from
Good
like,
question.
before we used to just put the address in, hit a button, and the drone was going there. Now now we're getting alerts because not that's the same thing, right? Every department has different needs, right? Like, if you're, we have, we have flock cameras, we have vigilant cameras, right? So I think between flock and vigilant, we probably have over like, I don't know, 50 cameras or even more in the city, right? So, and those alerts are going off all the time. We're like, we're neighbors with one of the cities that, they, for a few years they held the record most stolen cars in the country, right? So you can imagine how often our LPRs are going off, right? We don't have any gunshot detection, so we don't, I'm not saying we don't have that type of, calls for service, but we don't have to worry about that. But do you think it's ever going to get to a point where the UI is going to be
Yeah.
way too cluttered with all this stuff being sent to it?
Yeah, I think look, I actually think there's two things at play here. One is like it's everybody's going to want more data, more access to things, but then they're also going to want the ability to control how cluttered this is and pick the things that are important to them. So like when you build a UI, there's a couple things in mind. Like number one, I'm a big believer, give people options. Like some people are going to
Right.
want to have LPR as an option. So you could talk like for our map, you can toggle on what you want to see. Like it's all toggleable, right? So you can make it decluttered. And in fact, we have a button that you can press to remove the AI complete, or sorry, the UI completely. If you ever want to just like go, hey, I just need to focus. So you can do that too, because I agree with that. Cognitive load is like a super important thing for all types of aviation. But the other side of this, and there's a viewer that I just saw had a question about this, Rob Farley. Hey, Rob. He's asking a little bit more about, this stuff is evolving so quickly with AI, real-time analytics, et cetera. Um, if you do your job right, like right now, we all focus on providing a great DFR experience for pilots with enough information, but like, good cognitive load. So it's like pretty easy to do things. Ultimately, the outcome is like more and more AI that's assisting each DFR flight
Yep.
to simplify, but still create the outcome you want. So, like an example of that would be, like Flock has Freeform, which is like our AI that is visually looking for things. So right now with Flock Freeform, if you're a Flock customer and you go into Flock OS, you type in, hey, in the last 3 hours, there was a crime here. You type in like, I need to look for a red pickup truck, with letters on the back. It'll show you every photo of a red pickup truck with letters on the back on those ALPR cameras. And similarly, if you take that to our DFR software, for example, I'm just saying hypothetically,
Right.
nothing's been released, but hypothetically, if you did that, then all of a sudden you've got the ability to, while you're flying around, a computer that's helping you look for that suspect vehicle while you're flying. And eventually you have more and more of that AI layered in that's simplifying things and making you better at your job as a DFR pilot, even though it's like going through a lot of data for you. So you can simplify your UI, make your experience good, but the AI can make you a superhuman because it's being able to detect more than you can.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's all the integration with AI enhancements. I think it's going to be that's what I see DFR, the future DFR, right? And I think it's
That's
going to help the
3.0,
pilot.
baby. That's
Right,
3.0.
3.0, right. Maybe somebody will
Yeah.
write the DFR 3.0 playbook and
I mean, it's gonna get to a point where it's going to be more or less fully automated. Yes, the UI is really clunky right now, but it's also, well, not really
Yo,
clunky. I'm
whose
just
UI
saying
is really clunky? What are you talking about, Bobby?
some UIs that I've seen are really clunky, and I'm not going to go into any names, but all of this is to say that over time it's going to get better because it's training
Mm.
AI, it's learning, and eventually you'll get to a point where you go from um, drone deployment to outcome, and
Yeah,
whatever steps are in the middle is going to be all done by AI.
Right, but
yeah,
keep in mind, right? We're talking about, you know, the future of DFR with, the current platforms we have and the new releases of those platforms, right?
yeah.
Now, if certain things happen within the legislation in this country, what we're talking about that can potentially happen in, I don't know, in flock time, maybe in 6 months, right? Maybe a year to 3 years, but if certain legislation does pass, it might be a longer time for us to see all that stuff being incorporated into DFR.
Yeah, I do think, Lewis, I think you bring up an important point is like the speed of innovation can be hampered by like poor decisions when it comes to regulation. And I know what you're talking about. You're referring to certain, companies trying to ban Chinese drones. Like, let's just be clear. Like, that's what you're
Right.
referring to, right? On the federal and state side. Um, I want to be clear. Like, this. Like, we're not one of them. We at Flock have a 100,000 square foot facility in Atlanta where we're going out there and building American drones. We acquired Uniform Sierra. Duncan and that team is
Yep.
really good to continuously build American drones. Like, we're very big believers that we have to build these drones. Like, that part is no doubt. But we believe in like building before you ban anything. And like I want to reach parity. I want to take a free market capitalist approach to this. I want customers to pick us because we built the best thing. And we're often, having to advocate for our customers and their rights to use the tools that are best for them in the meantime in some of these places. So like you know how I feel about that. But the other idea behind regulations potentially slowing things down, and shout out to the FAA because I think they're actually doing a pretty good job right now and starting to clear some of these regulations faster, is
Yep.
like I think this drone industry would have looked very different even 8 years ago. Uh, if we did what other countries did, which is enable the regulations to almost create like a vacuum to be like, hey, we're going to let if you build tech that can do this safely, we will let you deploy it for that purpose, which meant companies would go out there and, like if BV loss rules came out 5 years ago, 8 years ago, like they did in some of these other countries, it would invite companies to fill the gap and like be able to create that tool. But because the regulations weren't there, these companies are like, well, I'm not going to build something that's illegal to use and then hope I can maintain enough money for 3 to 4 years for the law to change and then spend 1/3 of the money I would pull from venture capital to convince the regulatory bodies to change their laws. And the venture capitalists, when they underwrite risk, are not going to want to fund that investment. Like some of them
Right.
might, but most of them won't. And it wasn't until like people ask, why are drones so popular, in the last couple of years in like the venture capital community? Like everyone wants to build stuff. And you could come up with a bunch of answers. I think all of them are somewhat partially true. Like the Ukraine war, for example, has like forced innovation in an environment that's like on the global stage and shown how important and how much of a force multiplier drones are for defense. Like that's one way. But also, like the FAA slowly started chipping away at BV laws for public safety, which created, again, a vacuum of opportunity for companies like ours and other companies to start going, hey, wait a second, if BV loss continues to go down this path in a couple of years and it really opens up, which did happen, by the way, then
Yep.
like the victor go the spoils on who's farthest along because agencies will start doing it, which became true. And then these venture capital companies saw like, these drone delivery companies also start getting their waivers. Part 108 discussions start coming out, administrations that are more open to like cutting regulations. And like all of that came together where now everyone's fired up. Venture capital money's coming in,
Yep.
innovations like going, skyrocketed because that's the environment that the regulations have created. So I think they can do a lot of good, they can do a lot of harm in a lot of different ways. I think at least we're trending in the right way of the regulatory framework to allow people to use drones if the technology can be proven to be like much safer than what was used before, prior.
Yeah, as long as, certain equipment is not taken away in the meantime. I
Yes.
think that's what's going to set us back. All the
Yes.
great things you just said, if that from one day to the other, all of a sudden something gets signed, it's going to set us back a lot.
Yeah.
And it's going to
Yeah. There's no
destroy,
doubt about that.
yeah, it's going to destroy a lot of industries too. And we're not only talking about public safety, we're talking about, inspection work, right? a lot of other industries are going to get affected by it. It's not just public safety, but
And
uh,
Yeah.
but yeah,
and we can
I think
speak on the industry perspective, but on the public safety perspective, what would happen if DJI drones were banned tonight, right after Cory Booker's filibuster?
I listen. I
Just to be clear,
I
there's nothing on the agenda that suggests they're getting
right.
banned
I know,
tonight.
Bobby, man. You're gonna freak a lot of people out,
Yeah,
man.
well, that's your creating all this. Go
I
ahead, Lewis.
think
Sorry.
I was gonna say, as far as for us, I don't think we'd be able to afford the alternative. And I think it would take you guys some time to pivot. It would take Paladin some time to pivot. It would take every other DFR provider, even Cape. I know Cape has some stuff in the works with I forget what company that they're Inspired Flight, I think,
Nokia.
is it? Or Nokia.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think they also integrated with Inspired Flight. Yeah.
yeah, so I think they're already working on something. But even if they're already in talks or they have anything signed, I think it's still going to be it would be a while to if something like what Bobby said, hypothetically something got signed overnight, right? I think it would take us a while to pivot into something else. And the alternative right now
Lewis,
is
you're
just
using the word pivot, but I think I know what you mean. Um, and some of these companies, maybe it is like a real pivot. Like they're very like they have to do it that way. We've obviously been building these drones quietly for a period of time, but it actually the whole outcome, I think, which I think you and I would both agree on, is that um, there's like a parity gap. It's not just about funding, it's not just about money. No one has built, let's say, the American-made H-30T yet, right? Which is the payload to be able to do what that does. There's a gap in capabilities that will take some time and money to be able to close. My big thing is like I want to close that gap before people who are using this equipment every single day and rely on it, are it's taken away from them. I want to, even if it's more expensive, federal government or whoever can like go, hey, cool, we'll like you'll close the funding gap for you. That's like there's a way to do that. But if the equipment itself isn't going to be able to match what like Lewis is able to do, yeah, that becomes a little bit more
so.
difficult.
What's your timeline on closing that gap? Hypothetically,
You know, you and I have talked about this. First of all, like from a timeline standpoint, I'm going to be very honest with you. Our business is not like reliant on us trying to come up with an answer that like might not be true here. Um, Payloads are going to take some time. Luckily, like Flock is a camera company. Like that's what we do really well. And that's a big part of our forte.
would you have to
When it
revisit? Would you have to revisit the whole 400-foot thing?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No. That's no, dude. That's actually good. You're bringing up something interesting. Is like we designed specifically only for DFR, okay, and like for public safety use. That is our customer. We're not always like when we're building our American-made drones, and we have a couple different things that are in the works that you know of. We're not building them to also be really good at bridge inspections, to have a camera that can see a crack from 6 inches away or have sensors
Right.
that will prevent it from crashing into the bridge. Like that's really good. I want to be really clear. Like that's a good drone to have. If you're using that, we're not going to be. If you need to inspect a bridge, we're not going to be the drone provider for you.
Yeah.
Like that's not the point, right?
That's not what
But
DFR is.
no, yeah, we're gonna build like the stuff that we have is for 400 feet. Look down the pipe, like fly fast to a call. Fly 3+ miles away to make use of your beyond visual line of sight waiver without having to put 30 docks in all these places like
Yeah.
that. We're building it with that mindset. And I think the other thing is, and this is just a different strategy. I'm not saying like one's right or wrong per se, but I'm a big believer in like things need to go bigger. Not like, we've got some other things going on, but like when I say go bigger, I mean, I want drones to fly faster than even DJI's 1 mile per hour when you're flying the M350s. I want them to be able to stay up in the air for longer. 35, 40, the manufacturer says 55, like that's great. I want hours of uptime. If we're going to get to a point where we're truly democratizing air support, we need to start more and more replicating the capabilities of airships today. So like I'm a big believer in, does it make sense to like put like even our drone stations in 5 years? Some like agencies like counties and stations, or sorry, states are going to say, hey, I want like big drones that can fly fast and fly for long. And I'd rather have a few of those than like put 60 docks on my rooftop, in this particular area. And like we want to be able to make sure that that's like a customer that gets taken care of. That's an important
Right.
mission.
So you brought up a good point, and I think that's something that I've been kind of like craving for a while as far as DFR is, and I mentioned before like we treat our DFR program as an aviation unit, right? So
Mhm.
does the drone what's obviously for flying VTOL, it's a different application, right? But I
Mhm.
envision like having a VTOL drone that's always, not always, but it's already airborne. A call
Yeah,
comes in, it's already
sure.
on its way there. You don't have to, obviously it's gonna have to come and recharge at some point. But if some of these VTOLs, like we were talking about, they have anywhere between a 2 to 3 hour flight time, right?
Hmm.
If it's already airborne, obviously, like I said, every municipality, every PD is going to have a different need for DFR. When I think about a lot of times I call Bobby. I'm like, dude, I just thought about a great idea, and he'll tell you like it happens all the time. And I think about it for my application, right? We have a high call volume, right? So we have it's nonstop, right? We're 16 square miles, including waterway. We have 380 officers, so we're a decent sized department, right? Fourth largest in New Jersey. So we have a high call volume. So our drones, our pilots are doing 30 to 50 flights a day, right?
Yeah,
We just don't fly when when the wind gusts are too high. Rain, snow, we fly all the time. So I've always wanted, at some point to have a drone that's already airborne. The thing's always
sure.
flying. It goes to the call. It's there. It's going to have this, the speed that you're talking about, right? It's going to have, obviously VTOLs. We all know they're going to have really impressive payloads. I always think about the Dragonfish by Autel. Like that
Mhm.
drone amazes me, and uh, John McBride is part of the team now too, right? So I'm sure
Shout out
he's
John McBride.
Shout out to
he's told you
McBride.
some,
He's
yeah.
he's actually texting me right now. He's I sent him somewhere. He's on a super secret mission doing some cool shit. So
Oh, he's not
uh
in Colombia because I he was going to Colombia all the time. So,
no, I did not send him to Colombia. If he's in Colombia, that is an unsanctioned trip.
but
That's some
yeah,
weekend
so
shit.
I'm sure he's told you about all the great things that like the Dragonfish does, right? So 2 hour plus flight time, uh, amazing payloads. That thing can be over a city, just constantly doing an orbit over the city, and you're talking
Hmm.
about going from I think we're averaging about a minute and a half response time on our DFR calls, right?
Hmm.
With the setup we have now, I'm trying to
Hmm.
bring it down to about 30 to 45 seconds with with something I have in the works, but
Hmm.
that VTOL always flying, there's no reason why you don't have a response time of 20 seconds
Yeah,
anywhere
if
in the
you've got
city.
Yeah.
a if you've got, let's say, a VTOL that's smart loitering in a dedicated area, maybe central to your response location, and let's say that thing flies 100 miles per hour, and you send it to a call, you should have a response time that is so fast that any call in the city is like sub 30 seconds,
Oh yeah.
regardless, you
Mhm.
know?
I think a few
And
years
from larger
ago,
coverages.
FDNY said that they were looking at getting a dragonfish for DFR purposes, but at
Hmm.
least for the city of New York, they just couldn't do it because they said that I think it was FBI would just shoot it down. They would shoot down their own airship.
What?
Hmm.
The FBI would shoot down the NYPD's drone?
FDNY's drone, yeah, yeah.
FDNY's drone. Oh, Leo's drone. Shout out
Hmm.
Leo. Yeah.
Shout out to Michael Leo. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it just like brings goes back to the question of how can we get it to a place where if, for instance, DJI drones are banned today, let's say, Lewis, you clear 10% of all your calls with a drone, what would the alternatives be? What's good enough? Like if another American-made provider cleared, say, 5% of all your calls, would that be good enough?
Listen, I would have to make a bunch of phone calls, get a bunch of demo units, try to figure stuff out. I don't listen. It would be hard. I think what what we've what we've gotten comfortable with DJI is that or any Chinese made drone, right? I'm not only saying DJI, even with Autel, it's that when you press that power button and you take off, that drone's going to take off, right? I don't, a lot of times,
Sure.
a misconception that exists in public safety when it comes to a lot of these drone manufacturers is, they seem to forget that we're not, and I'm not knocking any other profession out there, but a lot of times they're doing controlled flights, right? They know that they have to go inspect this tower. They know that they have to go do a map of this area, right? What we're doing in public safety is, and this is even before DFR, you'd get a call and it's like, hey, listen, there's a bell out, there's two, three guys running in the yards. You have to get there with the drone. And here I am, the only thing I was worried about are my batteries charged, right? Because I don't want to get to the scene and my batteries are not charged, and if you go one of the alternative options is you get there and it's like, you don't have to worry about, maybe you have to worry about having enough batteries. Maybe you have to worry about, is the drone going to take off? Is the drone going to fly away? Because you hear all these horror stories, right? So I
Mhm.
don't know. I wouldn't be comfortable just going into a different platform without doing my due diligence and taking some time and seeing if there's anything out there available. I'd probably at this point probably look into like other international options than go with anything that's, blue UAS or whatever you want to, whatever color they're calling it now. But I think that's what I would start looking for options, elsewhere. I can't call Duncan anymore, but
You call Duncan,
whatever.
dude?
Yeah, you.
Duncan's in the kitchen, bro. Duncan's cooking. All right.
Listen, we talked about him last time. I think Duncan's awesome. He came to Elizabeth. He visited me a few years ago. And and this is a kid that, I think he had just graduated college. And he came out with his drone, and I'm looking at him like I had seen the lemur, right? I had seen the lemur firsthand. And he came out and I'm looking at him like, holy shit, this kid just built a drone that's, in my opinion, better than what the lemur that was backed by, a lot of VC
Yeah.
money, right? And
That team is incredible. That's why we snatched them up, man. And like we're honored to have them running airframes with us because they're really good. I mean,
no,
I was doing a test flight of a little something we got cooking, that like something that's never been done before. And yeah, here's Duncan on my Zoom call, and he's like, "Okay, all right, ready to launch," and he's like doing the whole thing, and I'm just like, "This guy's excited. He's happy. He gets to build stuff. His budget just like 100x, but like that's great. But like I'm just stoked that he's here, and that's like I think that's a big thing. Is I'm a big believer, and if you get the right people in the room, you give them resources and you give them some freedom to go do what they do best, which is what like drives them, which is go build cool shit. They're going to build some really cool shit. Duncan's like one example of people like that. We got plenty of people on the team, that when I had the opportunity to like convince them to come on board, like they did us the honor of coming and joining us. Like we just talked about John McBride, for example, Brett Candle, a lot of the folks that we have on the team. There's plenty, and like
man,
there's
Brett, that guy tried to sell me a lemur for like 50 grand.
Oh,
I'll
yeah,
never,
I'll
that's a good guy,
I'll
though.
never forgive him for that, man. And then what's the worst part is that he tried selling me a lemur for like 50 something thousand, and then a month later they came down to like 20 something grand. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, good thing I didn't jump on that. I'm pissed off now that I didn't buy it. Imagine if I had bought it. Oh, dude,
Oh,
Brett, I probably would have been knocking on your door, man, or flying that or throwing that lemur through your window or something.
Brett's a good guy. Shout out to Brett.
you don't
He
need
was
to
on our
throw it through the
podcast a
window.
few years back.
It's got the glass
Nah,
breaking feature. It'll
yeah,
just
but then it would just
quietly.
fall. It would just fall. Listen, people fall for that gimmick all the time, and I actually have a use case video I show in a lot of my trainings where we went to a barricaded subject, armed dude that barricaded himself, and guess what we did? We just knocked the window out and we flew the Avata right inside.
Old school, dude.
And it worked pretty well. I tell people all the time, man, just grab a rock, smash the window,
You,
and then
you,
send the
you used a
Avata in.
rock? You threw a rock at the
No,
window?
we didn't use the rock. I think we used some sort of like pole or something that the entry team had. But yeah, I
Entry
tell
teams have been
people
breaking windows way before
right. So I'm
drones.
like, so you
Yeah.
need to spend all this money on a drone that's going to break the window, and the majority of the demos I've seen, when it breaks the window, it kind of like grounds the drone anyway. So you'd have to have
But
two.
Lewis, I got a question for you, because you bring up something interesting. What are some of your favorite gimmicks that you've seen on drones in public safety that you're like, why did anyone build this?
Ooh. Remember, and listen, it was a horrible incident, right? But I forget after which school shooting that they had, and Axon um, put a taser on a drone. They put a taser on
Ah,
a drone, and
yeah.
Uh,
and I think that was like I think the taser. What was for? I know at some point they had a 365 a sig on a drone too. I think that was Axon
what?
also. Yeah,
Really?
there's
I don't know
videos.
about that.
Huh,
I think so. There was a sig on I think it was a 365 on a drone. But
that's
the whole
crazy.
taser thing, I'm like, listen, we've seen plenty of videos, right, where the tasers have no, they don't work, right? Listen, great tool, and it's and
It's a
when
great
it work
product.
when it work when
Axon did
yeah.
a great job with that. Yeah,
But
with the taser.
I'm like a taser on a drone. So it's hard enough, and you see a lot of times it's hard enough to hit your target with a taser, right? Now you're doing it with a drone while you're, probably flying an FPV, right? So, do you fly the drone into the subject and then hit the taste button at the same time, kind of kamikaze style? Because if you're shooting it from, a certain distance, and I think they had, a few board members resigned after that. I think they had some issues after they came up with that taser. But that's probably the worst one I've seen. Obviously, we can talk shit about Brink about their glass breaking tool, right?
Well, speaking of Brink,
It was a cool gimmick. It was a cool gimmick.
well, some history about Brink. That was actually the initial premise of Brink for CBP, was putting tasers and weaponizing drones to zap illegal immigrants.
Really?
Hmm. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that was what Blake was pitching early on.
Some
No
great
comment.
great optics behind that.
I have no comment.
The
I have no
optics
comment.
are, oh
What
my
about
God.
you? What about you, Rahul? What do you think is the most interesting gimmick that you've seen with the drone?
Anything that isn't one of Fritz's three principles, get there fast and see shit, I think ends up generally starting to slide into the gimmick category for me. Um, I don't want to call out any companies in particular. So what I'll say is like, I don't know that I'm a big believer in like loudspeakers on drones.
I agree. Oh
Um,
my God.
not for DFR purposes. I think like you could probably get kind of cute with it with patrol drones that are flying low if you're trying to like
Yes.
disperse a crowd, but it's like a very specific circumstance. And it's like a specialized tool for an event or like, something like that. This is just my personal opinion, by the way. But like if you're constantly using speakers, like I just want you to think about this from like an Overton window standpoint. If your drones are constantly flying around and number one, let's assume that the drone speaker is good enough that like if you're flying, it's gonna sound good and like actually be useful. Like even a helicopter, it's kind of hard to understand when they're doing like canine announcements and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to understand, but you can kind of get it. And that's a powerful speaker.
Yep.
But assume it's not gonna be 10E or something like that on these speakers. If you are able to pull it off, it is so creepy. It's just like right off the bat, if you constantly have drones flying around going, citizen, this is the police department,
Yeah.
it just feels too Orwellian. And like every time you adopt a tool and use it, I think every agency has to think like, hey, it doesn't matter how practically useful this might be. Like, is this gonna feel so weird to the community members that they're just gonna be like, I don't like the entire drone program now? And that always kind of fell in that category for me. And if like, especially if what you're using it for is like stop, halt, this is the police, or like juveniles dispersed from the area. Like it's just weird. So like this has just been my opinion.
It definitely wouldn't work at 400 feet.
No, sure shit would not work at
Unless you
400
would have
feet.
to like lower the speaker down to like 100 feet from 400 so you can give commands over the loudspeaker. No, I agree with you. I think, and then you got to remember, then it's affecting your flight time, right? To add a
Yeah,
payload
that's
on
the
the
thing. Like
drone.
you're adding a payload and like there I would also say like there's something about payload delivery too that like I think it could be useful like again for like Kyle, for example, search and rescue,
Yep.
huge deal. If you're a lifeguard and you're trying to send it out there like and you're not going to be it's not a sacrifice. You're flying the drone to drop the payload. So like you don't have to do the math on like if I always have this payload on or whatever the circumstances. But if you're flying truly automated operations from a rooftop that maybe isn't super easy to access, to like get there to put a payload on, then it's typically not worth it to just like have something always attached to the drone and fly it around with the idea that you might drop it off. And if you do drop it off, like what is the payload?
Yeah,
I know people talk about like Narcan, for example,
yes, yes.
as like a useful thing. Um, like Lewis, how many times have you here's a cop opinion. How many times have you deployed Narcan and you're like, before I deploy this Narcan, someone's got to secure this person by the wrists. Like it's they come out
So
punching. Like it's not super simple like that.
right, no, I agree with you. So I think I I like the whole idea of a drop mechanism. Obviously, that's not going to affect the flight time of the drone, right? I wouldn't. I would probably it would be an
The
application
drop mechanism?
on a 350, right? So for my app, so remember, I'm speaking of what we would use it for, right?
Okay.
Obviously, we're not a beach town, so we're not going to be sending flotation devices and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So some departments have, and I know every department's going to be different when administering Narcan, right? Some departments, every officer has Narcan. Some departments only supervisors have Narcan or
Yep.
EMS has Narcan, right? So for that type of application, I think having Narcan drop from a drone actually makes sense, right? And it's only
Hmm.
going to get dropped when the officers arrive. So let's say in those departments where officers get to the scene, they confirm that it's an overdose, right? They now they're asking for a supervisor, or they're asking for EMS. The drone's going to get there a lot quicker, right? Those officers could administer Narcan. And listen, I know we can go down a rabbit hole with,
But why not? Why don't they just have it in their patrol unit?
like I said, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but there
Okay.
are a lot of departments that that's the way they operate. So I think
Mhm.
having that use case where now the Narcan gets delivered, right? Or even the drone's already airborne when the call comes in, possible overdose, right? So after the confirmation is done, you drop it, it's administered, that's it, you're good to go. Um, and then for anything else, I don't think, I think it's very limited use case, right? I know there's, you know, first aid kits with tourniquets and all this stuff for, mass casualty incidents.
Mhm.
I think that's very, that means, you'd have to have a manned deployment site, right, where they can go out and they can easily put
Attach it. Yeah.
right and
That's the other
attach
thing
it,
is like
right,
if you're flying out of drone stations and doing all this from these rooftops,
right.
like,
It wouldn't
and
work.
an
It wouldn't work.
overdose call comes in, you're going to go run over there and like put it on. Like, but the officers are already on scene. Maybe they have it in their cars. Same thing with first aid kits or tourniquets. Like, it's all kind of a similar concept.
Right.
When I still do patrol every once in a while. I got a tourniquet on my left leg, like attached to my taser holster. Like, that's the way I'll run. And I know a lot of guys that'll do that too. So, like, aside from search and rescue, it's always felt a little gimmicky to me personally.
No, I agree. I
It,
agree.
it
I
goes,
think
you know what it does? It plays really well politically.
no, it does. It does. Listen, you have to think about it. Like even, when they're selling their, some companies are selling the solution, they talk about all this stuff, right? And then when I hear about it, I'm like, yeah, but they don't even have a drop mechanism. So why are they telling you that they have it? Right? It's kind of to me it's comical because now they go to city council, they're like, oh yeah, now we can drop whatever if we want to send, the paychecks from city hall to the PD, now nobody has to drive it. We could just send it via drone, right? Like it's just another gimmick, right? I think a lot of listen, we could sit and we can we can nitpick on all these attachments. There's always going to be flotation devices in beach towns. I think that's definitely a positive, right? But not every
Mhm.
drone's going to be able to offer that, and it needs to be a drone that's a manned launch location, right? I'm
Mhm.
big. I'm a big believer on a DFR program, right? Especially if you have a high call volume, one of your deployment sites should always be a manned site. And obviously you have to have the pilots. So wherever the pilots are, why not create a manned site at that location, right? Obviously, the docking locations are always going to have a downtime to charge and this and that, right? If you're a smaller setting, right, like us, it makes sense to have a manned site, right? Because we can
Mhm.
hot swap the batteries, we can have a 350 there, we can attach something to it to drop. So I'm a big believer in a manned site for that. Obviously, not every application is going to be like that, but
Sure.
I think some of those gimmicks in certain applications work. Definitely not the taser on a drone. I think that's never going to work. Um, but even guys, some people want parachutes. They want all crazy. And I'm like, yeah, by the time you're done loading your drone and with all these options, what are you gonna have, a 5 minute flight time? You know what? It's kind of like walking into the dealer and picking every option on the car, right? That's like they want everything on their drone. Like it's just not going to work.
I think parachutes are an interesting one. Some people are going to want them, some people are not. Like, I think it's an option based on like risk assessment. Some, like, I know some agencies, they go, I'm going to put a parachute on. Like, we support people who want to use parachutes. I think Josh and AVSS, like, it's a great company. Um, so like I think that could make sense just for certain people. I wouldn't classify that as a gimmick, but I think to your point, Lewis, like, the more you load up on the drone, the less useful you're going to make it to get there fast and see shit,
Yeah.
right? Like, you're giving away the fundamentals the more you put stuff on. It's like if you're a SWAT guy and you're so bare, like, you got so many mags, you got
Yep.
so much on your vest, you're not fitting through the door. Like, that's not, then what's the point?
No, I
Mhm.
agree. I agree.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the future of DFR. Rahul, you mentioned loitering VTOL, for instance, just being able to respond to calls even faster. And I know, I think it was like a couple years back, maybe in 22, 23, when Autel announced the Dragonfish dock, where you can
Mhm.
just have a Dragonfish fly out of the dock, recharge, hot swap batteries, and go back at it again.
Mhm.
Where is that currently? And like, where do we see that in the future of DFR?
Well, Bobby, uh, let's say, first of all, I have high conviction on this idea. Everybody knows, like, Flock Air Dome is, this is something we're working on. Like,
Dude, you
people
had
know.
you had you had a VTOL in San Diego 2 years ago.
We did have a VTOL, and we were doing some proof of concept flights and stuff like that for agencies to prove it, because I think the concept makes sense. Now, the one thing about the concept that's interesting is it actually lines up a little bit more with the way Lewis actually runs his program today. You were talking about a drone dock, but if the drone, it like stays up in the air for 2.5, 3 hours, uh, wouldn't it make more like for a guy like Lewis who's just going to fly around Elizabeth? he doesn't need a dock. He's gonna be like, yeah, dude, I can step out of the van every 3 hours to like change the batteries, inspect the drone, and send it back up. I don't really need the drone dock to either battery swap for me or do a contact charging, type operation. I can do that. And most real-time crime centers think like that. They go, I'm just gonna designate a parking spot at my RTCC, and every 3 hours I'll walk outside and I'll inspect the drone, replace the batteries, and send it back up because that's like worth it to me. I think the agencies that are going to want docks are the ones that are going to be in like, like state police that might want to put these every 5 to 10 miles of the highway. And they're going to want to kind of mesh these out a bit so that no matter who gets on that highway and starts getting pursued, there's always a drone that's like within responding distance. Like that's going to be a slightly different use case. Similarly with like large counties, they're gonna have to cover large areas. Or if you're doing like wildfire patrols, like that kind of thing, ends up becoming where you're so remote. But the typical DFR use case is probably not going to be something we have with the dock. I can't announce too much yet. I can say that we're very bullish on this thing, and this is a concept. I think this is a future of DFR. I think there's more than one future of DFR. I think there's another future that involves, like how do you make the indoors accessible to a DFR
Yep.
pilot? That's another thing, right? So like it's one thing to be able to look outside the house, but if every time patrol got to a call and they've got a gun pointed at the door and they've got a pop door and a burglary, and the guy gets on the radio and says, "Hey, DFR 1, can you clear this house for me?" And the drone can actually go inside the house and search the house and come back out, switch from GPS to visual, for example, and then come back out and clear it, or just perch, on the second story and be like, everything's only one closed door. It's right here on the bathroom. I'm going to hold that for you while you go. That's going to take using a drone to search a house from like a tactical, like a SWAT problem and or like a specialized Part 107 guy problem to every patrol officer makes it part of what they do. And patrol is searching 100 times as many houses, a month as SWAT is, even in the busiest SWAT departments. So like I care about making sure
Yep.
those guys are safe too. So I think like these are the futures that I like to see when it comes to new vehicles, taking things differently. And the only other future, the other two things I'd paint, the more near future that I obviously am biased, but I believe we're very fundamentally building at Flock, is the most integrated DFR system is going to be the most useful. So when you have a DFR system is connected to, like I said, your CAD, your Live 911, your Live 911 calls, your ALPR, your shot spotter, like you called it, but we have our own
Yep.
audio detection, those types of things. And then you have all of that integrated into a real-time crime center platform or like a data intelligence platform like our Flock Nova product. And it doesn't even have to be within Flock. It just plays well with other vendors. We can talk about that,
Yeah.
separately. When it's that integrated, but it's built in a way that like, respects the pilot's cognitive load. I think that's like the immediate future that's like here right now, where you're going from like it's a specialized tool that does one thing to all these things work together to arrive at the right outcome. And then eventually
Mhm.
AI layers on top of that and makes that more and more powerful over
So
the coming years.
imagine a VTOL that can get to the scene and deploy a Nevada from it, or like a small tactical
Like a
drone,
mothership.
like a mothership, right? You have the
Mother drone.
you have the VTOL that shows up on scene, and all of a sudden like a small tactical drone comes out and then clears the interior. Well,
Hmm.
like Kyle said, we'd have to position some repeaters inside the location because I
Yeah.
think that's the word on the street that some of these demos are doing. They're putting hiding repeaters inside.
Yeah. So
But
Rahul, you've started your drone program at Redondo Beach. Now,
Mhm.
what are the limitations currently of just say like a patrol officer flying a drone for any sort of like call out or anything like that? Just being able to fly a drone indoors and clear that
At
building.
Redondo? You talking
Just in
about at my
general.
agency? Well, I mean, in general, um, today, like if you're talking about a patrol program, like not DFR, these guys have to go get Part 107 certified. They have to operate under Part 107 conditions. They could operate under the COA, but that COA is not really written for them as much as it's written for the DFR pilot. So like they're limited to number one what the tech can do. So if they're using technology that's going to be able to fly safely indoors for long enough and go through walls with the RF and like do those kinds of things, like they're going to be limited by that potentially. Policy, typically agencies have different policy, like when and where you can deploy the drone. Some of that policy is limited by the local politics and what that city or state lets you do in terms of when you can deploy the drone. Like, I see a lot of those rules and laws getting peeled away, but like that's something that's been long standing in some of these places. And then at the end of the day, none of it matters. If I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, everything I just mentioned um, gets kind of eaten away because more often than not, like the culture of these agencies is not going to be like so wildly adopting of all these drones. The reality is every agency, if you have like a 100-person agency, they've got like a Lewis, they've got maybe a Rahul, they've got a Kyle Nordfors. If they've got these guys, maybe a few of them. I know plenty of multiple agencies that are just like love drones, love tech, are proactive, want to go out there and try this stuff. And if that guy's on scene, yeah, you're going to get a drone flight in there. But then you'll have enough guys that like get certified because a department-wide email goes out, hey, do you want to get your drone certification? They'll take it and then they'll take the training and they'll never use it. They'll never use it. They might they might take the drone out from the sergeant's office and like put it in their car in the same way they might do that with a breathalyzer or some other specialized tech, but they rarely use that thing. And then over time, their skills atrophy, like even in a few months after getting their certification, and then they don't even feel confident using it. So even if they could use it, they're like, I don't know if I want to be the guy doing it. And a lot of times it's not just because they don't feel confident or because they're like, whatever, I'm not going to get it. But when you have one of these call outs, nobody wants to put their gun back in the holster and be the guy that goes and gets the drone. Like very few people want to do that. And especially if you have an agency that doesn't have enough people where one person can even put their gun back in the holster. So like, most agencies will go to a burglary alarm and they'll dispatch one, maybe two guys. And they're like, cool, you guys are searching that house. And I think it takes a minimum of two guys to search a house safely. So if one of them puts their gun back in the holster and searches, with a drone, that's actually a less safe outcome, in my opinion. Maybe they hang back and one guy holds the door, the other one, drone goes in and like, that's great. Super unlikely that's the case, which is why I believe that indoor searches should be a DFR activity launched and presumed for the DFR operator.
Do you think so? Based on what you just said now, right? So everybody like and I say it all the time and I hear it from everybody, like DFR is the future of drones and public safety, right? I think that's the shift, right? And now because of DFR, you have a lot of agencies that are skipping that initial step, right? They're not starting a drone program, right? They went from no
Yeah.
drones to DFR. So I think that, I don't think that's a good thing necessarily. I think an agency should have, yeah, listen, it's great that you're going to DFR because you're bypassing a lot of growing pains, a lot of hurdles in the beginning and stuff like that. But I think you should have DFR and you should have a patrol-based drone program, right? When I say patrol-based, I mean like a program that's accessible to everybody within the department. Because listen, yeah, maybe someday DFR will be a fully autonomous thing where, the docking stations and all that, and we have it set up, you actually don't need the dispatcher can do everything, right? You don't need to have officers there, completely autonomous. I don't think it's there yet. I don't think the tech is there yet. You still need to have a drone program within the department for your off hours, right? And I'll give you an example. We just had one yesterday. I think it was like at 2 in the morning or something. I bail out of a stolen car, into a cemetery. So luckily we have a dedicated drone unit that part of our patrol unit. We have their dedicated car. So that's something even like when I help a lot of these departments out, I tell them like, listen, there's no reason for you to kind of like set up a program within the department where the drone's at headquarters. And believe it or not, there's a lot of departments out there where, the drone is at headquarters in the sergeant's office. A call comes in, the car has to come in off the road to go get the drone and go back. So from the beginning, the way that we set up our drone program, we self-deploy, right? Our pilots don't, they don't have to get approval from the chief or from the mayor or whatever it is, right? If it's a call for service, right? The way that we train their pilots and they see that, the drone's gonna, assist patrol, they'll self-deploy, right? And we have patrol cars that are set up with the drones inside of them. The drones are there 24/7. They're the units that are they're district cars. That's what they drive, and they go out to these calls. I think, and um I think, when we set up a program, I think setting up with COAs for everything, I think that's a plus, right? So
Mhm.
if I go to you to Flock and I'm like, I want DFR, but at the same time I want two drones for patrol. What's Flock's response to that?
If you asked me today, I would have a quiet conversation with you about what, like what we can immediately give you. But if you ask me in about 40 days or so, my answer is going to be publicly very different in terms of what our response is to that.
Right.
Because to be clear to you, Lewis, like I'm not advocating. I'm not saying like agencies shouldn't have patrol drone programs. I
No,
just
they
think
should.
that
Yeah.
yeah, I think that the perfect agency has patrol program and a DFR program. I don't think that they need to step up to it. I think if an agency wants DFR, they should be able to go straight to DFR if they want.
I
And
agree.
I tell them like, and if you also want a patrol-based program, you should be able to do that too. And I think that the more and more DFR gets utilized, there become like, especially in the way that I'm describing, like there becomes less and less use case for patrol. Doesn't mean that there's no use case for patrol drones. So like if I could search a house with DFR, great. That kind of removes some of that. If you have automated stations so that anybody who's Part 107 can download the Flock Aerodome app, for example, and launch a drone from their phone and be able to fly a DFR drone and go like come to me and then fly that drone from their iPhone, like I think that solves a lot of it. So what I'm trying to do with DFR is, and what all of us are trying to do at Flock Aerodome is we're trying to get this, we're trying to take DFR and fill every gap to make it as accessible as possible. Because you and I both know like, the saying in police work is cops, like there's two things they don't like. They don't like for things to change, and they don't like for things to stay the same, which means you have to thread a really, really, fine needle to be able to go like, here's the perfect way to apply this outcome without risking adoption.
Right.
And so like I try to go like, if you can treat DFR as infrastructure and you make it so easy to be able to deploy a drone like remotely, and you make it like maybe one or two people's job and they're dedicated to that and they can just constantly do this. And then on off hours, like you said, you've got 10, 15 Part 107 pilots that are trained to be able to pull out their cell phones. They don't have to take the drone somewhere. They can just be like, oh, let me just launch that drone and back my buddy up on the other side of the city because I'm sitting here at the station writing a report, but a call just came out and he's got it. If I drove my drone there, it would take me 20 minutes. He needs this thing in
Right.
30 seconds. I can do this. I don't have to go to the DFR chair to do it. Like that's the way I'm looking at it. But it doesn't mean that if an agency wants a patrol-based program today, they shouldn't do it.
Rahul, you are a visionary. I'll give
40
the
days, Bobby.
analogy,
40 days.
and
Mark
maybe we'll
mark
get
your
you on
calendar.
in
40
40
days.
days or so to talk more about it publicly. But to give you an analogy, China skipped the credit card era altogether. They just completely bypassed credit cards, and now they're a completely cashless society. Everyone pays through WePay or Alipay on their cell phones. So even if I'm hiking a rural mountain in middle of nowhere China, and I want to buy some fruit from a local vendor, you'll scan my phone for
What
me to
happens if
pay,
your phone is dead in
and that's
China?
it.
Are you broke?
Yeah, basically. Yeah,
Wait, can you
it's
just
got
have
its
the QR?
limitations. But
Can,
what I'm saying is, my
can you
point
just
being is,
tattoo
like,
Tattoo it
after
on
you
your forehead. Yeah.
tattoo the QR code on your body or something?
Sure,
Yeah, that's a
sure,
good idea.
you could do that. But the point I'm getting at is this technology is advancing so quickly, and
Mhm.
you're one of the on the forefront of advancing that technology that a lot of agencies may end up skipping having a physical drone
Oh,
for
you see it all the
patrol
time.
operations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see it all the time. It's also because like if you try to articulate the benefit of having a patrol program to some, command staff, like they'll be like, that's cool, man. But for 10, 15 years, I've been hearing about patrol drones and no, we haven't done it yet. And there's a reason. But then all of a sudden they hear about DFR and they hear about like, oh, I can clear 15% of my calls for
Yep.
service on average. I can reduce my response time. I can catch it. Like now the impact is so big, they're like, oh, okay, I'm in. That's something like as a command
It's
staff,
easier to
I can get behind.
justify the expense,
Yes.
right? Because now you
Yeah.
start talking about closing jobs out, like, those closure rates, right? It's
Yeah.
big. I think that's the selling point for DFR, right? It's the true force multiplier, right? You have that ability to respond to the jobs quicker, right? And you close out the jobs without even having officers having to respond. So I think that's the big selling point. But you're always going to need, right, the patrol for certain applications, right? Especially now, right? I think having still for the off hours and all that, I think it's still needed. But DFR, yeah, listen, once during our DFR hours, the patrol drones are not used. Nobody uses the patrol drones because the DFR drones are doing everything. But
Mhm.
obviously we're not a 24-hour operation, so there is some downtime where we need our patrol drones to be out there.
Yeah.
Well said. Well said. Maybe we'll hear more in 40 days. Get you back on, talk more about it.
I'd be glad to.
Awesome. Rahul, before we end the stream, do you have any shout outs? Anything you want to say?
I mean, like I got plenty of shout outs. If I do one, I have to do 1,000. So, let's categorize this. Shout out number one to the entire Flock Aerodome team. Because you guys have said some very kind things to me, but at the end of the day, it's not me. Like if I was just doing this by myself, I would have nothing to show for it. We've got like a phenomenal engineering team. A lot of visionaries before me, like we were talking about Fritz, as one of them who came up with a concept here. The Flock team by itself, before Aerodome came there, did what what we're going to do with DFR. They did it for ALPR, and like changed the landscape of public safety in that regard too. So that's a big piece. Shout out to the public safety agencies that are not. I don't care if you're using our platform or not. If you're doing DFR out there, I'm a big fan of you, because what you've done effectively is you've taken a risk on something that I believe has become less and less risk feeling over time. But you're going out there and you're using technology to make your officer safer, your community safer, reduce your response times. Like, you're taking a jump. And there's always like that first 100 agencies or first 1,000 agencies in any trend that are like really going out there and being leaders. They have strong leadership and a lot of desire, and the communities are accepting of that. So big shout out to them. And I want to, like, actually, this is gonna feel like a hot take, dude, but I got to say shout out to like the other companies in the space. Each one of them, I said this before, we should root for them. I don't want these companies to go like, have issues where they go broke, or like they something bad happens. And especially when it comes to like American drone manufacturers, like the folks like Skydio and Brink. I know we like, like there's always jokes and stuff like that. And I might not see eye to eye with some of these companies when it comes to like government affairs. I've talked to you about that, but it's important that we have companies doing this work. And I think, like, I've talked to folks like Adam over at Skydio, and I think he's like a genuinely like a good dude. I'm gonna be honest. I think he's like, heart's in the right place. The guy likes building stuff, and I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for guys like Blake at Brink, who grew up and like they just like building cool shit, and they're like, they really are also like Blake loves public safety. He might not be a cop like us, but the guy's trying to go out there and help, and he's trying to, of course, he's trying to build a company while doing it. But like, that's the American way,
Yep.
if you can go out there and do that. So I'm rooting for all these companies, and they're helping make us better. Hopefully, we're helping make them better, and ultimately, like, that's making public safety better. And of course, if we clean up some of the mud in the waters on the government side, like, I think it's the story tells itself, man. It's really important what everyone in the space is doing, and guys like you, Lewis, who are advocating for it on the customer side and going out there and like, you're never afraid to speak your mind. I respect that. And lastly, Bobby, your 3D mapping shit, man. I've seen this over the last couple of years, where you
Stop it.
started and
Stop.
where you're at now, and it's like, it's pretty remarkable, man. Like, you guys have done a really good job. So those are my shout outs. I'm missing 100 people, and for that, forgive me.
Dang. Well said. Well said. You should run for senator one day.
Absolutely not.
Wait,
All
for
right.
California, for Florida, for what? What is he going to run for? What state?
Just in case anyone at any California franchise tax board is reading, let me be really clear about this. I am a Florida resident, and I like it in Miami. Okay, the weather's fantastic. I like to fish. I like to golf. It's great cigar smoking weather. It's
Wow.
amazing. So, but I'm not running for office anywhere. So that's the answer to your question, Lewis.
All right. That's it. Rahul Sidhu, VP of Aviation at Flock Safety, Flock Aerodome. Great chats. We'll see you at the next one.
See you guys.
See you, everybody.